You may be wondering why you continue to attract abusive people and or situations. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I've spent many years working with people who have experienced abuse as well as perpetrators of abuse. And I wanted to spend some time talking a little bit about why people feel like they get caught up in these abusive cycles. Well, the first thing is I think a lot of people unconsciously spend a lot of time thinking about their abuse, what happened, why it happened, and they try to come to terms with it. And unfortunately, a lot of people who've experienced it internalize blame from their abusive situations or the abusive people that they attract. And so when they can't reconcile, or when they can't come up with a good enough reason, or they have all of these unanswered questions, they will internalize blame, and they'll blame themselves and say, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this, maybe I shouldn't have worn that, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe I shouldn't have been in this sort of situations. And so it just becomes sort of the circling of the drain effect, where people spend so much time caught up in this loop where they're just placing the entire burden of the situation onto themselves. And unfortunately, when people blame themselves like that, they feel like they're not a good person, and they feel like they deserve these things. And so they lead with that out into the world and in their relationships, unconsciously, of course. And so what tends to happen is they'll tend to attract people that sort of, they'll take advantage of that thinking, and those people are abusive. And so when they continue to attract people like that over and over and over again, that becomes validation and confirmation that I'm a bad person. I am the common denominator in my life and in my circumstances, and I'm doing this. There's something wrong with me that I continue to attract that type of person, as opposed to looking at like maybe the thinking and the behaviors and things like that. It becomes this like, there's something wrong with me. I'm a bad person, and I deserve unfortunate circumstances. So there is sort of that leading with that. And so I hope that kind of explains one scenario. There is another scenario, and I think this is for a lot of my therapists and helpers, like teachers and nurses and things like that. There are people that lead with empathy, unfortunately, and I think it happens to a lot of good people. And so a lot of people that lead with empathy, they don't know how to manage their empathy effectively enough, and so they when they get into relationships, they'll gladly hop into a relationship where they have to help someone. And I think the term that they call it now is like struggle love or whatever. And so there's a lot of people that sort of like, oh, I want to help this poor wounded soul get back on their feet, and I want to be this knight in shining armor, or this queen in shining armor or whatever, and I want to rescue this person. And so a lot of times when you are rescuing people that are unfortunate, not always, but a lot of times, especially for women who are rescuers, I will say that, but also for men, is that you are attracting people that are insecure, that want to be saved. And they have a tendency to attract people to rescue them and pull them up and give, they want people to give resources and all of that. And again, it's not always 100%, but in a lot of circumstances, if you don't manage your empathy, your kindness and things like that, you are going to be constantly, endlessly giving so much of yourself. And unfortunately, people like that who are givers attract takers. And so I think that sort of, that's one way of putting it. I think also too, if you have, people that are in a vulnerable state can tend to attract people that are abusive. So if you struggle with depression, severe depression, if you struggle with PTSD, if you've experienced grief and loss, so if you've lost someone recently, if you're in a vulnerable state, a lot of times, when you're in that state, you're kind of you're not in a good place. You're not able to give 100%. And so a lot of times with people that are abusive, the way that they show up initially anyway is they're charismatic, they're caring, they're full of energy, they are fun, they want to get you to smile and laugh and feel positive. And so that's how they sort of work their way in, because they can see very quickly that you are not operating at your best self, and so they'll take advantage of that and use that to pull on your heartstrings, and then the relationship dynamic will shift at a certain point where you've been hoodwinked. The other thing that I think is common, but it's not really talked about a lot, but I deal with a lot in my practice, and I have over the years, especially in working with type A personalities. I think it should be said that relationships, true, genuine, authentic relationships, take time. You have to nurture them over time, right? It's not an instant, and a lot of people go for like instant attraction, but all that to say, especially with type A personalities, people who spend a lot of time at work, some people that have spent like 10, 12, 15-hour days at work, they don't really have a lot of bandwidth, for anything else or anything that's complicated or that they feel like is complicated or would take a lot of time and work. They want people to just kind of be ready to go. And so that's not always what happens. That's not always something that's going to be able to happen easily and effortlessly, but who typically will be ready to go, full of energy and excitement, especially at the start of a relationship, is a person who is a lot of times, again, abusive, right? Because abusers in the beginning want to love bomb, so they're always available, you're always perfect, they've already set up the plans, and so everything is oh so convenient and ready-made for you to go. And another thing with a lot of the type A personalities that I've worked with over the years, one of the things that they will do is they'll kind of get caught up in the mist, is what I like to call it. But they focus heavily on goals. So for type A women, especially, they'll be looking at, oh, I've got to get married by a certain time. I've got to have children by a certain time. I've got to have my house. I've got to have all these like major life things done by a certain time. I got this wonderful career, and so I've got to have these things, and it's got to look like this. So let's say I'm 30 now, so I've got by 32, all of this stuff has to be in place. So they're very heavily concentrated on the goals, and so a lot of times when people are very heavily focused on goals, they'll blow past the red flags because they're so focused on the future that they're not really necessarily focused on the present, the moment, and being more discerning about what's happening in the here and now. As long as you're telling them what they want to hear, or they feel like they're on track to have a baby, to have, these, whatever, these big life goals, moving in together, then they're going to make it work. And then unfortunately, they'll find out after they've made all of these huge commitments, they're tied in financially, that they're kind of their partner is quite the prickly pear. Hope that helps.